Alright guys, in this part we're going to talk about how to get input in a Python program. Up to this point, the only thing that we really know how to do is just output stuff using the print function and some other things, but we don't have any way to get input from the user, which actually unlocks a lot of capability. And luckily with Python, it's actually really easy. So let's just jump right into it. So let's just say that we have a name variable and we want to store the name of the user who's running this program. So what we can do is use the built-in input function, just like we have the built-in print function, we also have the built-in input function. And what you put inside of here in parentheses as a string is what you want to ask the user in the terminal. So you could say, for example, what is your name? And then we're going to add a space because the input happens right after this. So that will create some space between the message here and the actual input that you provide. So let's go ahead and run this program and take a look at what happens. All right, so it's running now, and the first thing we see is what is your name? And then we see this little cursor here, and this is where it wants you to type in the thing that it's asking for. So in this case, we could do Cody. And that's it. The program terminates because there's nothing after this that it has to run. So let's go ahead and take this variable now that should store whatever the person inputted. Hopefully it's their name. And we could say hello and then name. So let's try it again. Let's run it. So now I'm going to put Billy. And now it says hello Billy. Perfect. An interesting thing to keep in mind about these inputs is even if we do something like age input and then we ask for the age of the user. So what is your age? Even though we're asking for it as a number, I mean, the program, Python obviously does not know that. So every time we get input using our input function, it's always going to be returned back as a string. So what I mean by that is if we run this and inside of here we put, Cody for the name and then 23 for the age or 24 for the age. I forget how old I'm getting. If that is what I put, it's still going to be stored as a string. One easy way to know that as well is that if you hover over the function here, it tells you the return type. It says string, and then it says read a string from standard input. So since this returns a string, you can see if you hover over the variable that it stores a string as well. So it's smart enough to know that. So we can go ahead and print the type using this type function we saw before, as well as the actual value. Let's run it again. So now we'll do Bob and we'll do 23. There we go. We get age input type string and age input value 23. So the purpose for me explaining this to you and showing you that it is a string is because in computer programs, if you want a number, you probably want to store it as a number, as an integer or a float, right? Because then you could do math on it and stuff like that. If I was to ask for an age and then store it as a string in this variable here, I can't add 5 to it, right? That would just add it as a string. So we want to figure out how to convert a numerical input from a string to an actual numerical type such as integer or float, okay? So an easy way is to do age, for example, the variable that you want to store the input, and then we could do input same as before. So we could say, how old are you? And then what we could do is just take all of this and then Control X, cut it, and do int, opening and closing parentheses, and paste it. So what this is saying is that take the output or the result from this input function here, which should be a string, and then pass it into here, which will convert it from a string to an integer if it can. So then we could do print. We'll actually just take this code from above, replace it, and change it from age input to age, because then we can verify the type of the variable, make sure it's actually converted to an integer, okay? So let's run it, and I'll go over it again. So what is your name? I'll say Billy. What is your age? 23. And then how old are you? This is the new one that we just added. We'll say 45. And now it says age input type integer or int, and then age input value 45. So now we can see that this returns a string, but then we pass it into int, which converts it to an integer, and then we store the integer into our age variable, and you can see the type here of int. The thing that you need to keep in mind though is that whatever is passed into input needs to actually be an integer, because if you pass in, if you're asking how old are you and you say potato obviously cannot be converted to an int, right? That doesn't make any sense, so there will be an error. So let's try that out. So say Bob 23, and then the new one here, we'll say potato, and boom, we get a value error. It says invalid literal for int with base 10 potato. So all that's doing is telling you that whatever value is passed into our input cannot be converted to an int. It just doesn't work. In the future, we'll learn about if statements and stuff like that, where we can actually check to see the type and make sure it's actually convertible. But for now, that's too advanced. We don't know how to do that yet. So for now, just make sure that anytime you pass an input and you're converting it, that it actually will work, okay? That's all you can do for now, okay? So now that our age variable stores it as a int rather than a string, we can do stuff like adding to it and whatnot. That's the benefit of storing it properly as the proper type instead of just as a string, because a string is just a string of text, right? I'll show you this as well though. You can also store it as a float. So you can ask, for example, what is your height in meters? And usually with a measurement, it's going to have a decimal point. It's going to be a floating point number. So we're going to ask for it. It's going to give it to us as a string, but then we're going to immediately convert that string to a float and store it as a float in the height variable. So let's try that now. Let's actually take all this and comment it out. We can do that with Control/. Let's run it again. There we go. So now it's only going to run this line of code, which is great. So what is your height in meters? We're going to say 2.4. There we go. Height as float 2.4. Height type float. Great. And since we just learned how to convert a string to an integer or a float, I might as well just show you that you can also convert a number to a string. So if we have a number like 42, we can get it as text by doing string str, pass in our number, and now the number is converted to a string and stored into the text variable. So we can print out the text variable as well as the type to confirm it. Let's try it out. There we go. We get number as string 42 and text type string. So that is how you can get input in Python. That's how you can also convert the string type from the input to a float or an int. I now have a new challenge for you guys, which is to create a simple calculator. So all you have to do for this challenge is ask for two numbers from the user. Then I want you to show the results of the addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of those two numbers. That's it. We can't really do anything more advanced than that just at this point in our series, but soon we'll be able to do some more advanced stuff. So for now, I want you to pause the video and try doing this, and then resume the video and see if you were able to do it successfully. All right, let's do it. So first of all, let's start our program by just saying simple calculator, just to make it look nice. Now we need to get two numbers from the user. To do that, we already learned that we can do num1 is equal to, and we can get the input, so we can say enter first number. So we're going to ask for the first number, but we want it as a number numerical type. So what we're going to do is convert it to either an int or a float. So you have to decide which one you want. Now you could do an int, a whole number, right? But that's not very flexible, right? A more flexible data type will be a float, like so, because a float basically supports whatever number that you would want, even with decimal points. If you only do int, then you only support whole numbers. That's just not flexible, right? So we're going to get that first number from the input, convert it to a float, and store it into the variable here. And we'll do the same exact thing for the second number. So change it to num2, and we'll say second. And that'll also be a float. So now we have two floating point numbers, and we want to do our calculations of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division on them. So let's start with addition. Addition is equal to num1 plus num2. Subtraction is equal to num1 minus num2. Multiplication, num1 times num2, and then division, num1 divided by num2. Now that we've done the calculations, we want to present that to the user by using the print function. So we could say results, and we can use a new line character here, so it's on a new line. Now we could just print out addition if we want to, just print the result directly, but let's put a little bit more work into it. Let's actually show the calculation that we're doing. So an easy way to do that is we could say num1, and then we can add on to that with a string literal plus num2 is equal to, there's a comma, is equal to, and then we'll say the result of this, which is addition. So we're simply saying whatever the input is, like 1 and then 2, we're saying 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. That's very simple. And we'll do the same thing for the rest of these. So there is a better way to write this piece of code here to format it more easily. That's with string formatting, but I'll be showing you guys how to do that in a separate episode. It's a little more advanced, okay? So anyways, that should be it. Hopefully this all makes sense so far. Let's go ahead and run the code and take a look at how it works. First, let's actually comment out this. We don't want to run that code. Let's only run our calculator code. Let's try it out. Here we go. So simple calculator looks nice. Enter first number. We're going to say 69. Enter second number. We're going to say 1. And then here we go. The results, 69 plus 1 is 70. 69 minus 1 is 68. 69 times 1 is 69. 69 divided by 1 is 69. Great. So hopefully you guys are able to do this. It's not too hard of a program to code. In future parts, we're going to learn how to do a lot more advanced programs than this. This is probably one of the simplest things you could ever do. But now you guys know how to get input from the user in Python, which is great. We can do a lot of things with that. So stay tuned for the next episode, where we're going to learn about something new.